Okay. Poetry 9, The Shield of Achilles, W.H. Auden. So here the observer is looking at the sculptor and expects something to be created on the shield or protective gear that the Achilles wears. But what happens, the sculptor does is the opposite. She looked over his shoulder for vines and olive trees, marble, well-governed cities, and ships upon untamed seas. But so this was her expectation. She thought that the sculptor would do this. But what she saw, what the sculptor did was different. But there, on the shining metal, his hands had put instead an artificial wilderness and a sky like lead. So she was expecting some natural beauty, but the sculptor created some artificial wilderness. A plane without a sheet of that shield. A plane without a feature, bare and brown. A plain means if you see a vast land without any trees, that is called as a plain. Without any feature, bare and brown. See, you have to imagine a thick forest, compare it with your plain land without any trees. So that is what he was actually was picturizing the battlefield there. But this lady had a different picturization in her mind. A plain without a feature, bare and brown, no blade of grass, no sign of neighborhood, nothing to eat and nowhere to sit down. Yet congregated on its blackness stood an unintelligible multitude, a million eyes, a million boots in line, without expression, waiting for a sign. So here what he has sculpted is the battle scene. The million eyes, the million boots reflects high and level as the place. It means they don't have any identity. Proved by statistics that some cause was just in as the place. Some cause, what do you understand by the higher ups say the fight is justifiable according to us. However, soldiers do not have personal opinions. So yes. Out of there, a voice without a face proved by statistics that some cause was just in tones as dry and level as the place. No one was cheered and nothing was discussed. Column by column in a cloud of dust, they marched away, enduring a belief whose logic brought them somewhere else to grief. So here the poet intended to say that the decision taken by the higher ups or the higher authorities has brought grief to the soldiers. She looked over his shoulder. So first time when she looked, this is what she expected. First time when she saw a sculptor sculpting on the shield, this is what she expected. Okay, this is what she expected. She expected vines and olive trees, marble, well-governed cities, and ships upon untamed seas. This is what she expected when she looked at the sculptor for the first time. Then second time she looked over his shoulder. Again, second time when she looks, her expectation is for ritual pieties, white flower garlanded heifers, libation and sacrifice. But there on the shining metal where the altar should have been, she saw by his flickering forge light quite another scene. Second time when she saw, this was her expectation. She wanted some religious activities to be picturized on the shield. But what happened? There was another scene. What was that scene? Barbed wire enclosed an arbitrary spot where board officials launched and sentries sweated for the day was hot. A crowd of ordinary decent folk watched from without and neither moved nor spoke as three pale figures were led forth and bound, to 3 posts driven upright in the ground. So again, her expectation is that of some religious activities, but what does she find is barbed wire enclosed in arbitrary spot. Arbitrary barbed wire in spot, she's talking about fencing, how soldiers are used to fence or protect the land or have borders where board officials. So what are these people doing in this arbitrary spot? Why arbitrary spot is specifically mentioned there? Because if an army decides that we will conquer this particular territory, any territory becomes an arbitrary spot there. They do not need a reason to occupy. That is what she is mentioning. And what do these officials do there? They simply sit and crack jokes, whereas sentries means the lower level of soldiers, they toil day and night. A crowd of ordinary decent folk watched from without and neither moved nor spoke. And this is the reaction of the common people there. Let's say suddenly if an army comes and attacks you, what are you going to do? The local people are very much helpless. That is what she is mentioning. As 3 pale figures were led forth and bound to 3 posts driven upright and down. So there are 3 people marching around protecting that boundary. The mass and majesty of this world, all that carries weight and always weighs the same, lay in the hands of others. So she's saying, our fortune is in the hands of others. Though the world is very fast, the world is free for every one of us. Due to political considerations, due to this military kind of mentality, our fortune is in somebody else's hands. For example, if a particular country occupies another country's territory, what will the people in that country do? Even we were in that situation. We Indians, when British, and even during the early period when people conquered us, the localites were very helpless. They couldn't raise any voice because we are not that powerful at all. They were small and could not hope for help, and no help came. So we can equate our situation during the pre-independence days with what the poet tries to mention here. What their foes like to do was done. Their shame was all the worst could wish. They lost their pride and died as men before their bodies died. So this is very much important. So what their foes like to do was done. Their shame was all the worst could wish. They lost their pride. So because of this conquering, people had died before their physical body dead. Okay, this is what it means when it says they lost. When you lose self-respect, when people stop respecting you, you are dead there. Okay, your physical body is different. Death is different. They lost their pride and died as men before their bodies died, because they had lost their freedom, they had lost their friends because of this occupation or because of this war, and before they physically died, they were already dead mentally. So this is still second time. Then again she looks at him for the third time. She looked over his shoulder. I mean, she again looks at the creation of that shield. What she finds, what she expects. She looked over his shoulder for athletes at their games, men and women in dance, moving their sweet limbs, quick to music. Again, these are her expectations. She wanted to see people depicted by the sculptor on the shield, the happy life of the people. She wanted the happy life of the people to be depicted, where men and women used to dance and for the music. But what had happened? But there on the shining shield, his hands had set no dancing floor, but a weed-choked field. So this is how the battlefields will be. Weed-choked means it's like no man's territory. Nobody cares to remove the weeds. Okay. Then a ragged urchin aimlessly and alone loitered about that vacancy. So this is what the sculptor from here, the sculptor describes. Ragged urchin aimlessly and alone. Here ragged urchin means a mischievous child. A ragged urchin, a spoiled one, because it could also refer to an orphan, because he has nobody to take care, because his parents are dead in the battlefield. Loitered about the vacancy. A bird flew up to the safety from his well-aimed stone. Even the birds are escaping from this kind of confinement. That girls are raped, that 2 boys knife a third, were axioms to him. So for this small kid, girls being harassed and boys being killed, so it doesn't make any difference, because he is so much used to it because of the negative impact of battlefield. Who would never heard of any world where promises were kept, or one could weep because another wept. So even many times in the general circumstances, what happens when somebody else is crying or disappointed, we try to console them or we try to be empathetic with them. But this boy, because of this negative impact of wars and repeatedly seeing the dead bodies every day, he, he does not respond. For him, there is no promise at all. There is no hope at all. This boy has developed pessimism to such an extent, where promises were kept, or one could weep because another wept. The thin-lipped armorer Hephaestus hobbled away. Thetis of the shining breast cried out in dismay at what the god had wrought to please her son, the strong, iron-hearted man slaying Achilles, who would not live long. So this is actually, who is that lady? This lady is none other than Achilles' mother, who is watching. So when she thrice she watched what she is creating. The next time what happens? The sculptor takes a break. He keeps the shield there, unprepared or partially or completely prepared shield there, and then leaves that place. Then what happens? Who is this? The thin-lipped armorer Hephaestus hobbled away. So who is the sculptor here? Hephaestus is the sculptor. Then Thetis of the shining breast cried out in dismay. Who was watching all this time? It was Thetis. Okay, she cried out in sadness at what the god had wrought to please her son. So the belief is that, see, in even in our everyday life, if you are from rural areas, you will get to know, when you go to temples, they, some of the priests say that gods, or the deities, come into their body and prophesize and tell about the future. Similarly, Thetis was of the opinion that whatever Hephaestus is sculpting gives an impact or gives a insight to the future. That is why she cries out. Thetis of the shining breast cried out in dismay at what the god had wrought. Because the belief is that God has entered Hephaestus' body and made Hephaestus to write future. What is the future? To please her son, the strong, iron-hearted man slaying Achilles, who would not live long. So, what did it prophesize? That Achilles, who was killing people like anything, was a great warrior, will die shortly. Because of that reason, she started crying. So, to sum up, the Thetis watches the sculptor, that is Hephaestus, engraving something or writing something on the shield, which is a protective gear for any soldier, that especially for Achilles. This Hephaestus was creating that protective gear for Achilles. There he was picturizing something. Three times, all the three times, Thetis expects different thing. One thing, but what Hephaestus writes is completely different. What all Hephaestus writes is that of the scenes of the battlefield, the agony of people, cries of people, widows, orphans, and how insensitive people have become because of the impact of war. And finally, does she start crying? So, when she watched three times, also she did not cry. But when this the Hephaestus moved away, she started crying aloud because she could see that Achilles will be killed in this war. Okay.